Welcome to EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of George Mason University and Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Our website is econtalk.org, where you can subscribe, find other episodes, comment on this podcast, and find links and other information related to today's conversation. Our email address is mail@econtalk.org. We'd love to hear from you. My guest today is Chris Anderson, editor-in-chief of Wired magazine. He is the author of The Long Tail, the subject of an earlier podcast, and his next book, scheduled to come out in 2009, is called Free. Chris, welcome back to EconTalk.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Chris, you laid out some of the arguments behind free in a recent article for Wired that we'll link to at econtalk.org. What's the idea? What's free now, and why is it only going to get better?
Well, there's really, I think you phrased it right, which is, what's new about free? We've had, there's basically old free and new free. Old free is, basically been around since the free lunch, which was, by the way, San Francisco saloons in the 19th century would give you free lunch if you bought beer. It is the razor and blades. It is the free checking, etc. It is all a cross subsidy of sorts, where one thing is free but you pay for another. You don't necessarily spend less money in the end, but the psychologically powerful word free is invoked to change the behavioral economics of the purchasing decision. We can talk more about the increasing range of cross subsidies and clever ways to make things feel free, but that's not new. What is new is what's been basically enabled by the internet. The internet is if you look around, first of all, almost all services and content and products on the internet are available in a free version, and almost everything is free to the consumer. Google doesn't show up in your credit card bill. That is the main driver, the main reason why everything on the internet is free is basically digital economics. That for the first time in the history, we've had basically an economy where all of the inputs, in this case storage, processing, and bandwidth, are basically falling in price or halving in price every 18 months. It's as if the factories of the 19th century, where steel was falling in price, at that rate, where labor was falling in price, where electricity was falling in price. It's like all the inputs to the internet economy get cheaper every year, and that has basically enabled an economy where whatever you're doing today is going to be cheaper to do tomorrow, and eventually it's going to cost so close to zero that you might as well call it zero, and thus an economy built on free.
Well, I think it's more than that. I want to mention to my listeners that Chris has encouraged me to be really hard on him and tough and ask really rude and challenging, no, not the rude part, just the challenging question part. And I would encourage all the listeners, as they often do in the comments to this podcast, to raise questions to help Chris write his book, because it's in process. But let me ask you something about that, about the falling price. It is a dramatic, it's the pace and the relentlessness of it that is so impressive and unprecedented. It would be like the price of steel falling dramatically every month for years, which would be very, very unusual. The price falls on many real resources due to innovation and technology, but they don't fall this relentlessly at this pace. What's puzzling, though, and I think gets to your real insight, which I like. What's puzzling is that would usually just mean falling prices, and I think there's sort of three things to think about. One is we could observe falling prices. We could observe low prices. And as you point out in the article, low is not the same as free psychologically. So the leap to free, which is really quite extraordinary, is a different thing. It is driven by the technology, but it's not just that, because the technology alone would seem to suggest just cheaper. And free is much, much better than cheaper for us users. So I think what's going on, as you point out in the case of the email story, why don't you tell that, the Yahoo Google competition, the real costs underlying free email are not free. They're quite substantial. The servers, they're falling, but they're quite substantial. So talk about what happened between Yahoo and Google in that competition and why free did triumph.
Absolutely, and I think you've constructed the challenge well there. Just before I tell the story, just a couple clarifications. We're obviously talking about the marginal cost. Obviously, the capital cost of big server farms is still very high, but because they become so much more powerful with every tick of the technology clock, they can serve more people, and so the marginal cost on that kind of a unitary basis falls lower and lower. But so let me give that example in the case of email. 2002, 2003, Yahoo is the leading webmail provider. They charge 29. They give you, I believe, 4 megabytes of email capacity for free. That's ad supported. And if you want 25 megabytes, they charge you $30 a year. They then hear rumors that Google is going to get into the market. Now they had competition before. There's Hotmail, there's AOL, there's others, Comcast, etc. But Google is going to come in by looking at they hear that Google is looking at the underlying costs of creating an email service, and that is basically storage more than anything else. And they said, look, the underlying costs are falling even faster than Moore's law, and they're actually, the cost per a megabyte is falling at halving about every 14 months, not 18 months. So Google says, well, we're going to enter this market, and we're going to disrupt it by doing one thing that no one else is doing. We're going to give away not 4 megabytes, not 25 megabytes. We're going to give away a gigabyte. And then they went to 2 gigabytes, and for free. And so now Yahoo's like, okay, now how do we beat that? We can't beat free because, so if Google's basically taken price off the table. Our $29 for 25 megabyte thing versus 2 gigabytes for free looks silly. So we just valued it at 0. Okay, but that just equals Google. How do we go further? And they looked at that same curve, the falling cost of providing the service to the average individual, and increasing value of that individual, both in terms of whatever services you can market to them, their loyalty to the broad network of Yahoo sites, possible advertising opportunities. And they said, okay, well, the value is going up of the consumer, and the cost of serving that consumer is going down. So we're going to do the only way we can beat 2 gigabytes for free is unlimited gigabytes for free. And so Yahoo then introduced that. They say, we'll give you unlimited capacity for free forever. And, that is only possible. The only way they were able to basically take this march to the bottom and take it all the way to 0 and just take price off the table was because the underlying technology trends made that, if not a profitable proposition today, it would become a profitable one tomorrow. Basically, the curves played to their advantage, and it was not a question of whether a company should get to infinite capacity for 0 price, but when. Who was going to get there first?
Yeah, of course, there is one thing better than free, and that's being paid to open an email account. And of course, we may get there. That may happen. And people are paid to do things they value all the time. If you join a certain survey activities, you get a free computer or a free television. There are all kinds of ways that people are being rewarded for joining these groups of people. But the point I wanted you to emphasize, which I think is the key, are these sort of, they're loosely called, I don't really like the phrase because I think it's often misused, but network externalities. Or a better way to say it would be economies of scale, that an extra user on your email account service, such as Yahoo's or Google's, it's not just that, well, it's a little bit better to have one more. It's that if you have a large number, you can reach them and access them and advertise to them and do all kinds of things. That means that one person really looking at a customer as an individual is not really the right way to do it. You want to look at your ability to marshal large numbers. And
right.
So, for example, a lot of people emphasize the virtues of being first into a market. I think that's sometimes overrated because latecomers can often learn from early comers' mistakes. But if it's important to be first, then in that situation, giving the good away or paying people to use your good to build up a base of users that would have the value that can produce in these markets is really the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, what people often forget about digital economics, and digital economics, by the way, are not just constrained to digital products. It's any service or product where the initial development costs may be high, but the marginal cost of manufacturing and production are close to zero. What people forget about that is that this economic model almost requires you to maximize your reach. Because Bill Gates understood this from the beginning. Developing Microsoft Office costs a lot of money. The best way to make that money back is to spread Microsoft Office as far as possible to basically so that everyone on the planet is using it, and you just set your price so that becomes, or use other methods, which we won't go into here, so that becomes possible. On the internet, you basically, Microsoft had the digital economics allowed them to distribute or to manufacture the product for low marginal cost, but the distribution was a whole other matter. They distributed in stores and boxes and things like that. On the internet, distribution becomes a zero marginal cost or close to proposition as well. So web businesses are all about scale because scale costs nothing. And what scale enables is is a range of business models, from advertising to what we call freemium, where you charge a tiny fraction of your user base, the most engaged ones, a price for a premium service and give it away to everyone else for free. But you get those network effects, you get those kind of viral effects, and we've never really seen a business before where that was possible. I mean, the notion of a free sample in the real world. Sorry, in the real world, that was a Freudian slip.
Yeah, in the bricks and mortar.
In the world of atoms, if you're selling muffins, you can give away maybe 1% of your muffins for free, to sell 99%. In the digital world, you want to do just the opposite. You want to give 99% of your product away for free because it costs nothing to do so that you can sell a premium version to 1%, and that 1% can subsidize everybody else. Well, and that is just really this is really the first time. I mean, there's some analogies in things like pharmaceuticals,
yep,
et cetera, but even they have distribution scarcity. The internet is the first time we've had sort of the low margin, the near zero marginal cost of manufacturing plus near zero marginal cost of distribution, and that's the unique combination that really kickstarts free as the sort of dominant business model of this economy.
Well, just to add a footnote, when you say that it's the opposite in the digital economy, you want to charge 1% and give it away to the 99%. You'd like to charge 99% and give it away to the 1%, but competition among alternatives usually is going to force you to give it away. And I think that's one of the lessons here, which I find so exciting, which is just the power of competition.
Right.
That because the Google Yahoo example being a really good case, in a way there really are only two players. There's two large players. As you say, there are other smaller players that have somewhat.
Actually, Google is I believe, a weak number 4.
A weak number
market.
4. Okay, so
Microsoft and AOL are still large, believe it or not.
So we have a handful of players, but even with a handful is enough because of the technology's speed in evolving very quickly. If you don't lower the price, you take the risk that you will be not just doing less well down the road, but you might be out of business in that segment of the market.
Exactly. I think we have to coin a phrase, and maybe you could help me with this. Yahoo got freed. So someone basically set the market value of email to zero, and Yahoo had no choice but to respond. It's actually a fascinating. In the case, basically, my proposition is that every industry that can become digital will become digital, and every industry that is digital will become free. So that sooner or later, virtually every industry is going to have to compete with free or become free one way or another. The interesting, twist on that, which we saw from the Yahoo example, is that it's easier for the newcomer to be free than it is for the incumbent. So Yahoo had, let me make up some numbers. Let's say Yahoo had 100 million email users. If they said you get infinite capacity for free, they have to buy acres and acres of storage capacity and new server capacity to satisfy this new demand with no revenues coming in, by the way. Google, as a newcomer, they can say the same thing, but because they have almost no customers, they can buy, a few dozen servers.
It's an experiment.
And a few dozen servers, and basically promise the same thing with much lower economic consequences. So in a sense, the newcomers can introduce free and disrupt the market much more easily than the incumbents can respond because migrating an existing user base to free is more costly than creating a new user base on free.
Well, it's a little exaggerated because Google isn't the corner store challenging Walmart. Google's a rather large player, so it is possible, and I'm sure it is what actually happened, that when Google started to offer free, their user base expanded not just a little, but quite a bit. And they did it in a smart way.
Yeah, it turns out email is one of those things that, because of the namespace, the scarcity in the namespace, and legacy issues about your address book, that people don't switch email that often. So it was basically a safe bet on Google's. They could basically throw this grenade into the marketplace, recognizing that the economic downsides were limited.
But they did it carefully. Remember, in the early days, you couldn't just sign up. You had to be invited, and that was a very clever thing. It gave it a little cachet. It made people, want to try to find out how they could get into it. And it probably, I didn't think about it at the time, but it limited the expansion a little bit. Indeed.
So that's interesting. But when you look around, and we should talk a little bit about the difference between free and 1 cent as well, because
one of my questions.
You brought up a good point there. Before we come back to that, when you look around at all the industries that they're getting freed. I mean, it's, obviously software. As software moves to the web, software goes from something you buy to a site you visit for free. So software obviously goes free. Content obviously went free. But look at services. I mean, once upon a time you would have like a divorce lawyer, right? And then you'd go to a divorce lawyer, and for a uncontested divorce, it would be $2,500, etc. Now you go to a website, and there's I think there's one site called 123divorceme.com, which is great, and it's like $25, maybe it's $50. I don't know, just some filing fee, etc. So basically, there's a service, legal. The services of a lawyer that have been turned into software, and because it's software, it inevitably becomes free, or at least the service is free, and all you're paying is the court fees. Look at tax accounting. You go to Intuit, and you can fill out your taxes for free. Look at travel. Look at a travel agent. Look at a brokerage. All these services used to be expensive propositions offered by professional experts. Now they're software, and now they're free.
Well, they're close to free. So let me play skeptic for a minute, and this will lead us into the penny versus free discussion. Skeptic says, come on. There are a few things that are free. Email, some lousy piece of software in its beta version, et cetera, et cetera. But actually what the Internet's done is take a lot of things that were incredibly expensive and just made them cheap. So let me give you my favorite example of this that is I think an example of what you're talking about, but does show some of the limits. If I want to buy a hardcover book, in the old days, I could go to my bookstore, which would be usually a place that might have 10, 20,000 books. Now I can go to a Borders or a Barnes & Noble that has 100,000 books. But I could go to Amazon that has millions, or any of its competitors online. And let's say I want this hardcover, and it's discounted nicely. It's $15. But I can also go to half.com. And if I go to half.com, the book's not a new book. If it's been in print for a while, I can usually find that hardcover book for less than $1. Often, when I want to go read history, say, a history book that's been out 10, 20 years, they're so inexpensive. They're so inexpensive that I thought, some of these folks are selling these books for 50 cents and 75 cents. One argument would be, well, they're making money on the shipping costs. I don't think so. These are hardcover books. They're a little bit heavy, and the shipping rates are quite reasonable. I think mainly what they were doing was building up a reputation as a reliable seller. They thought, I want to get into this into eBay or Half.com or one of these other reselling activities. And the way you're successful there is to build up a reputation. One of the keys to success, obviously, is to build up a reputation. How do I do that? Well, I need a lot of customers. So here's an example where the economies of scale are very strong, and I'm willing to, quote, lose money in the short run and make money in the long run, which is what some of these, what I would call the digital economy, is often about. Or I'm willing to lose money on this activity, as you say, and cross-subsidize it effectively by selling advertising or creating a larger network of people to interact with each other. So that is true, and I think it's very powerful. But the books aren't zero. They're 75 cents. It's just really cheap. The software's not $400 or $800 or $1,000. To get your own web page isn't a $20,000 expenditure. It's $100, which is glorious, but it's not quite the same.
I don't think you've identified an example that anyone would put in the free taxonomy. That there's basically that's not benefiting from digital economics. But there's some cost efficiencies on the distribution side, but that's not an example of what we're talking about here.
No, I disagree.
That's a classic Adams.
I disagree.
Adams case.
No, I disagree, because I think what it is getting at is this value to having this large base of users. Let's go back to the Microsoft software example. So the Microsoft software example, it costs millions of dollars to develop the piece of software. Gates understands that the marginal cost, that is the cost of selling one more unit, having spent those high fixed costs, is very, very small. So he prices it relatively low.
Well, actually, you would hope that he would. In fact, he prices it at $300.
Well, but it's still a fraction of, and there's all kinds of discounts for educational users, but it's still a fraction of. Just stick with the economies of scale for a minute. One of the reasons he does that is he wants a large base of Microsoft users who are going to communicate with each other, right? In the early days of these kind of software challenges, it was worthwhile to price below marginal cost or price below some measure of cost, because to get that initial scale of users was extremely valuable. Now, again, no matter how valuable that is, it's still not going to be zero. So what's driving zero is something a little different, I suspect, the Yahoo Google story. It's that you're going to get access to these folks for other purposes, either that they use all your other stuff because they're used to your configuration, your brand, you're selling them other stuff, or you're advertising. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, how do these people make money? Because in a standard model, and one of the things I really do like about this example in your whole story is how it kind of turns the standard economics story on its head. Obviously, there's a part of it that's standard economics, economies of scale, drive price down, marginal cost is close to zero. But the standard view of economics, which I think is too simplistic, it says, well, to make money, to be in business, you got to make money. So free can't exist, because if marginal cost is so low that it ends up not being a penny, but free, well, then you don't have any revenue. And what that misunderstood, that sort of textbook naivete, is the ability of people in the actual marketplace to find ways to make money as they give stuff away. So let's talk about that, because I think that is a crucial part of the story.
So I am in the media business. I run a magazine. We have a big website. I work for Condé Nast, a big magazine publisher. The media business has always been built around free. Radio is free to air. Television is for many free to air. Our websites are all free. Our print publications are subsidized to the point that some of them are in fact free. That's called controlled circulation. Some of them are subsidized to the point they might as well be free. And it's often been said that if you can understand why they sell newspapers in boxes on the street that don't limit how many copies you take, you'll understand the newspaper business. They're not selling newspapers. What they're selling is an audience to an advertiser.
Eyeballs.
It's a third-party pays model. So what you have here is the media model is a three-party business, where you have producer, you have a consumer, and then you have the third party who pays for access to the consumer. The media business, which and that model has existed for 100 years, is now becoming one of the core business models for anything on the internet, media or content or of all sorts, or software or services. The ability to do a third party pays model allows you to make things free to the consumer because you're delivering a quantified audience to an advertiser who will market to them. So that's not even shocking or unusual. It's a little surprising that the media model has now proved so broadly applicable that it's sort of taking over all these other businesses that that never could be advertising supported before. But it isn't it doesn't disrupt economics in any special way. The other ways to make money are the things like freemium, where you give away, the 99 get free, 1% paid. Things like labor exchange. You mentioned the survey thing, but one of the examples I use in the article is Google's directory assistance service called Goog 411. In that case,
which is spectacular, by the way.
Which is fantastic.
Incredible.
You call it GOOG 411. Directory assistance, absolutely free. Call on your cell phone, whatever. No advertising. No one's monetizing your earballs or whatever the phrase would be. What you're doing, whether you know it or not, is training their speech recognition algorithms. It turns out that training speech recognition to understand the human voice is one thing. Training it to understand regional accents, to understand proper nouns, to know the difference between Joe's Diner and Jose's Diner or whatever in a regional accent requires someone to say no. You say I'm looking for Joe's Diner. They say, do you want Jose's Diner, and you say no. That act of saying no has basically training their algorithm and creating something of value to them, which is why they're willing to give you a valuable service for free. So, and then you have the last one, which we have to talk about, which is the whole freaky thing of the gift economy. The Wikipedias, the Craigslist, the blogosphere, where there's no one's making money
Linux,
at all,
yeah.
and yet things of value are created.
Yeah, that is an extraordinary thing. Now, some of those are reputational, right? A person might play with a software design or something like that to create a reputation as a quality person that they would then be able to sell to an employer. But many of these things are not of that nature. Wikipedia is not of that nature. I'm awed by it, to be honest. I find it just extraordinary. The glorious stuff that gets done for free, that's created for free and given away for at no charge.
Yeah.
By the way,
I think the problem with economics, and I say this as someone who basically thinks of economics as being this sort of God's model, the right toolkit to look at most things. The problem is that it's really oriented largely around monetary economies, and we've largely assumed that monetary incentives, perceived one way or another, are the best way to get to get people to do things, and the recognition of all these non-monetary incentives. Like reputation, attention, expression, etc., that prove not only to be sufficient to generate, things we used to have to pay for, but often better at generating participation and encouraging people to donate their labor. That is, I think, the sort of the brave new world of our investigations, of our research here. And the question is, is economics even the right word? I mean, can you really have an attention economy? What's the money supply of attention? Can you have a reputation economy? What's the money supply of reputation? Is this, have we broken the metaphor of economics? Have we bent the metaphor of economics to the point of breaking, or can that algorithmic, rational process extend to these new non-monetary economies?
That's a good question, and we've been talking about that indirectly in the last couple of podcasts. We've been talking about the economics of community and the extent to which economics deals with love and courage and the virtues, and a podcast with Deirdre McCluskey. I will say that Adam Smith, in his second most successful book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, the one that people haven't heard as much of, does talk a lot about the non-monetary aspects of what we care about, that we live a lot for pride and ego and courage and reputation, and that's a very obviously important part of the human enterprise. But our standard economic tools aren't particularly good at it. In my early days as an economist, in a more academic mode, I wrote on the economics of charity, and economics has something to say about altruism. But what I think it doesn't do very good at is what you're really saying in the algorithmic kind of way. If you think about the market for these things, I think we understand the individual motivation, and I think we're getting even more sophisticated in how we think about it as economists. But what we're not so good at is making predictions about, say, which markets will work better as gift markets rather than for-profit markets. I think we have nothing to say about that virtually. We always have an ex post explanation. So it's easy to say ex post, well, Wikipedia's people enjoy being part of it. So they get satisfaction, and it's non-monetary, and the greater the non-monetary satisfaction, the more they'll do of it. But that's ex post. Ex ante, economists would have had trouble anticipating Wikipedia as a quality product. They would have said, well, maybe it'll exist, but it won't be very good. The idea that it could exploit the wisdom of crowds and the pooled knowledge of interested experts without any compensation, I don't think anybody would have predicted that, and it's a very pleasant surprise.
I agree.
Well, we've been talking about people contributing things via software or online websites, etc. Let's talk about a different kind of giveaway, which we touched on earlier, which I think you have some interesting psychological insights on, which is the difference between free versus a penny. Talk about why that's important and how it's making a difference.
Yeah, this is what some venture capitalists have called the penny gap. And from an economic perspective, the difference between 1 cent and 0 cent probably isn't significant. And yet, psychologically, the chasm is often uncrossable. What happens is that there's this. I'm imagining this switch in our brain, this little sort of flag that goes up, and every time this is the is it worth it flag. And every time we're forced to make a choice or a decision as a consumer that involves price, we do this sort of imperfect calculus, which we look at the price. We then try to estimate the value to us, possibly some sort of relevant comparables, and then ask ourselves, is it worth it? And that little bit of calculus is actually work, and it makes us tired. And it's sometimes more work to even ask the question than it is to just reach into our pocket and pull out the penny. And if you the problem with micropayments, the problem with the 1 cent, model, is that it basically invokes the entire apparatus of the whole kind of, is it worth it price value calculation in our heads, and we go through this entire exercise for almost no monetary gain. So it's got the psychological baggage of a price without the economic virtue of a price. And so the general premise, and this is basically the kind of the stake in the heart of micropayments, is that why not just round down? Why not go straight to zero? Take the whole psychology of is it worth it off the table, and find some other way to make money that doesn't invoke that same decision process.
Well, I agree with you that zero has a little bit of a qualitative difference from free. I'm not sure that the calculation part's the essence of it. There's obviously the transactions cost, the reaching into the wallet, and the keeping track of things on both sides of buyers and sellers. The 1% has the advantage of you do make a cent on each customer, and a lot of business models have avoided free and have systematically charged, quote, low amounts. It's Walmart's model. It's Southwest Airlines model. I think they've been very successful in just saying cheaper, better and cheaper, and keep working that model. They are not crossing into the zero range because their brick and mortar costs are too real, I suspect. But there is a psychological impact. The question is whether it's important or not. Economists tend to underweigh the psychological impact. I see it at work when I go to a baseball game. I don't know if you've been to a baseball game lately, but one of the things they do in the middle of the game, in between innings, is a bunch of people. Usually, it's the mascot and some women and a few men. It's a weird collection of really cheerful-looking people with the mascot, and they take a mortar, a cannon, and they fire T-shirts into the crowd. T-shirts are, they're worth something. They're worth a few bucks, but they're not fancy. And they don't fire very many. They fire about 20. It's fun to watch this cannon thing work that fires T-shirts, and the zeal of the crowd for something for nothing is a little bit scary. You see the same phenomenon when a foul ball goes into the stands. Of course, there's more there than just free. There's a memory and all kinds of things. But there does seem to be free does have a way of working on us. I'm sure there's some kind of chemical aspect to it that neuroeconomists have started to look at. Well, we'll have to look into that. But the psychological impact is quite impressive, I suspect.
There's of course the difference between real people and economists. The famous joke about the economist and the non-economist walking down the street, and the non-economist notices the $10 bill on the ground. The economist says it couldn't be there because if it were $10, the marketplace would have picked it up.
Somebody would have picked it up already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reality is that we are imperfect. We are imperfect animals, and although we may not want the T-shirt, maybe the cost of the T-shirt is insignificant to us. The free has a sort of magic quality that does it both sort of grabs your attention, turns on all of your greed instincts, and also we're sort of rightly suspicious of it since we've been sort of suckered by free so many times in the past by things that weren't actually free. My point only on micro transactions and micro payments is that if to get back to our kind of our founding mantra that in a competitive market price falls to the marginal cost, if the marginal cost is falling closer and closer to zero and your price were to follow it in lockstep, eventually you get to a number so small that you might as well just round down. You might as well just say, you know what, this is not a game I'm going to win long term.
And I think the real insight there is that if you can round down and save the transactions costs and invoke those magical endorphins or whatever get released when we think we've gotten something free. Of course, there's no free lunch. We got to mention that here as always. But something that looks close to free or at least has a zero marginal cost so that either we don't have to think direct out of pocket, we don't have to think about it, or it's highlighting some part of our brain that we are endowed with, then you've got to find some other way to collect revenue. And of course, to the extent that those transactions costs are large, then the alternative revenue source is not as challenging. It is an interesting question, by the way, to think about areas of the economy where there's a missing opportunity for free. Stamps being an example to think about for a minute. Stamps are really a nuisance to keep track of. It's weird that you don't get a membership. And one reason, possibly.
Stamps mean postage.
Postage. Why don't you just get a membership? The FedEx has a membership. You just pay. You don't have to have the funny little thing. You just give them cash and they...
These stamps of which you speak.
Yes.
I can't remember the last time I used a stamp. There's only two kinds. There's two kinds of mail I send. There's email, and then there's the mail that's pre-postaged envelopes that people send me.
Well, they're kind of dying out because of the transactions costs of keeping track of the little sticky things, and it's really annoying.
They keep changing the prices, and then you have to sort of cobble together penny stamps into a big mess.
Which is really annoying, and so there's an end run going there with email, phone calls, other forms of communication. But it is interesting that the government-run post office keeps that incredibly costly little sticky thing, and the other forms of mail, like FedEx, have chosen to don't use stamps. They just let you pay cash. But the real issue would be, is there a way to let people not just avoid the stamps, but mail all they want and pay a fixed cost up front, or some other way?
If you're a business, that's exactly what you do. You have a barcode,
right?
And you mail all you want, and they keep track. And at the end of the month, presumably, they send you a bill.
But it's even better not to keep track, right? The ideal world would be one where you don't have to keep track, where the marginal cost is so low. It's not in the case of mail. It's not low enough.
Yeah, we call that spam.
Yeah,
that's exactly email, and that's what you get.
That's true.
You get the tragedy of the commons.
But let's move to the cases that you identify in the article where people have found a way to charge something very close or actually zero and make their money elsewhere. You give the example of airfare and music. Can you talk about those?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the examples we talked about, it comes out of the digital realm, where you have a kind of a real directional change, a new phenomenon in the input costs of these industries, where things are falling. But it's possible to use technology and kind of increasingly flexible markets to take businesses where the underlying costs really aren't changing or maybe are going up, and still invoke free by sort of redefining the business you're in. And the best example, or one of my favorite examples, is that of air travel. Ryanair, I was in the UK late last year, took a flight from London to Lisbon for £5. And
which is how much in American dollars?
Which is what, $8, $7, something like that.
That's a bargain. Seems like a bargain. Seems like under the cost of providing the seat to get you there.
It certainly does. And so I got to say that a price like that sort of focuses the mind. What the heck is going on here? And what is going on here is that they've redefined the business they're in. They're not in the chair on a plane business. They're in a kind of a much broader kind of travel and stuff around its business. So they make their money from rental cars and hotel reservations and from the cargo that they carry on the hold. That's why they charge you for your baggage, because you're displacing paying cargo. They charge you a lot for their sandwiches. They're in the water business, the drinks business. They're in the duty free business. They're in the advertising business, both on the website and on the screens in the back of their planes. They get subsidies from the kind of off the beaten path locations that they fly to because they're bringing tourists. And the CEO of Ryanair has promised to make the flight absolutely free, zero, by introducing gambling. The planes will be flying casinos, and much as you can get free drinks in Las Vegas, you can get a free flight if you gamble in the air. So that's the underlying gas prices, jet fuel prices are going up. The cost of airplanes is not changing, but technology has incredibly lowered the cost of everything around the flying experience and allowed them to be in a much bigger business, including tourism generally, travel generally, package delivery, and advertising businesses, and even gambling, things that are not traditionally considered part of the airline business, but could be if you're creative about thinking about where to get your revenues.
Well, let's think about pricing a little more widely in the airplane example, because I think it raises a number of interesting cases. First, one of the problems with these kind of models, and it may prove to be viable, it may prove not to be viable, but one of the problems, of course, is that if you make it free, but you can gamble while you're there, it might tend to attract people who don't like to gamble but just want the free flight. Then they can't generate the revenue they need to cover their costs, and they don't make it. Similarly, if you advertise, that's a lovely idea, but you've got to hope that the people who are on the plane actually then buy the products, or at least notice the products the second or third time when they're advertised elsewhere. Otherwise the people won't pay.
Well, that last proposition is unprovable, and you basically, that is the mystery of advertising for the last 100 years.
You're not quite.
It won't be solved now, and it hasn't been a huge barrier before.
Right. Well, I don't know. I do think it's an interesting idea, though, to instead of putting just a cheesy little ad on the back of the seat, have a performing troupe of the stewardesses and stewards who actually talk constantly about the virtues of a particular set of maybe luggage or something related to travel, or
wow,
right, or the hotels or rental cars. In fact, how about
in the free section, you're constantly harassed.
Exactly, just like
by the flight attendant.
Right, it's just like the free section of many software programs. You get the pop-ups and the ads, but it's free.
Human pop-up ads,
or even better, it's just limited leg room. It's the same as the free email program used to be. The free version, you only have a certain amount of storage. You want a large amount, you got to pay. That's the premium.
Yeah, sure,
so the premium part of the airplane, comfortable seats, people who bring you drinks, etc. In the back of the airplane, it's nonstop harassment with all kinds of ads and no
we
leg
already
room.
have dynamic pricing on flights between different classes and different times of purchasing. Let's just go, rather than sort of tiers of prices. Let's bring one of them down to zero.
Yeah, and that guy in front of you who likes to lean back, right, really far and ruin so you can't get your laptop open. That guy should just give you a $5. And for the privilege, you're thrilled. Sure, you're miserable for the 4-hour flight, but you've got the $5. Now, it is interesting. Julian Simon, the late great Julian Simon, is the economist who actually did something useful. Many of us merely toil on the vineyards of academia, but he is the person who proposed to the airlines that when they overbook, which is generally a good idea, but then you have the cost of overbooking. There's a benefit of overbooking, which is that you don't get stuck with half-empty flights. The cost of overbooking is sometimes there aren't people who cancel at the last minute or enough. So he's the guy who said, let's auction off the seats. And, it's a brilliant and wonderful thing, and it works. And just as an aside, it fascinates me that it's very awkward to do that kind of solution in an informal way. When it's organized via the airline, everybody just thinks, oh, this is normal. But let's take the $5, the guy in front of you wants to lean back. If the guy in front of me said, I'm really tired. I want to put my seat all the way back. In fact, I'm going to rest it on your legs. Not only am I going to cut into your leg room, but we're going to put this on the seat so I can go all the way back. But I'll give you $20. You'd be horrified. But the fact that there's different parts of the airplane that have different amounts of legroom and you pay different amounts, everyone's totally understanding of that.
I saw this happen. I agree. I saw this happen at the airport the other day. There was a plane that was overbooked. They said, okay, we're going to give everyone a $500 voucher if they'll take the next flight. And not enough people did. And there was this woman who said, I need to be there for a business meeting. I will add another $500. She said this out loud. I will add another $500. I will give you $500 cash right now, and you get the airline's $500 if you will take your seat.
And economics predicts two possibilities there. One is people started fighting and clawing to get at her. The second possibility is everybody looked down at their shoes. Which happened?
The third possibility, which is that very quietly someone came up and took her offer and did it, but. You do enough of that, and you got real class warfare on your hands. You basically sort of got the rich, elbow their way to the front of the line, and the poor, sit there with their grubby money in their pocket, feeling like A, they've missed their flight, and B, they could be disadvantaged for something that was obviously a trivial amount of money to that rich person.
Yeah, I don't think of it as class issue. I really think of it as a set of cultural norms. Let's take, because sometimes it's not the rich person, it's just the person who urgently needs to get there, is willing to pay a premium if they're not rich. But the example I like to think of is the grocery line. So you're in a hurry, your wife's delivering, you've got a bleeding child in the car, you're racing, but you had to run in and grab something. Okay, it's a bit absurd, but you get, for whatever reason, you've got to get out of the grocery quickly, and even the quick line has 6 people in it. If you say to those 6 people, folks, I'm really sorry. I know there's a line, but I've got appendicitis and I got to rush to the hospital, and you show them the scar or whatever, they'll all say, oh no, go ahead. If you say, I'm in a hurry, here's $20 for all of you, split it up, and you cut in line, nobody thinks it's attractive. So I really
exactly money's degrading. I take it off the table.
Yeah, I do think there's a role just of transactions versus cultural norms. So
exactly. And look, we're used to thinking about things in terms of monetary incentives, but there's a lot of non-monetary incentives, and that's really what we're seeing online. You said something earlier, which is that we were going to have to get to the sort of the no such thing as a free lunch. Mm-hmm. And I've been wanting to ask a proper economist why I can't prove this wrong. Once and for all, and now I'm going to take this opportunity, if you don't mind.
All right, sure.
So the no such thing as a free lunch is basically a statement about externalities, which is to say, if you think it's free, it's only because you're not properly accounting the externalities.
No, not exactly. No? Let me try it a different way. Here's the way I do it with my students. I say, suppose I go up to you, and we might be friends, we might not be friends. Let's say we're sort of friends, and I say, Chris, you seem like a great guy. I want to take you to lunch. And you say, well, and I say, well, I'm going to take you to a fancy restaurant. And you say, well, I'm kind of down on my funds right now, down on my luck. I'd rather not. And I said, no. It's free. It's on me. Now, true or false? Is it free? And that's where I start with my students. Now, the answer is no. And it's the first answer that the students usually give when I say, is it free, is they say, well, you might be expected to reciprocate, right? And I said, no, let's pretend that, Chris, you're a horrible person. You have no intention of reciprocating. In fact, maybe you even get pleasure from knowing that you're going to take my free lunch and not ever, ever invite me back. Then the second possibility is, well, it's not free because there's an expectation that I'm going to ask you for something down the road. And I think psychologically people have trouble saying no when they've been given something in the past. But let's suppose, again, you're a conscious free person. It doesn't affect you at all. And again, maybe you even revel in the fact that you're not going to do my favor when I ask you, having taken you to lunch once already. So is it free then? And the answer is, well, no. In many senses, it may be free to you. And that's the sense, I think, in which your article and idea is about. It very well could be free to you, but it isn't going to be free to someone. It's going to be, there's a cost to me. Now, let's suppose I have let's say the owner of the restaurant is a friend of mine, and he just likes having you in the restaurant with me having a conversation. So in that sense, it doesn't even cost me anything, but of course, then it costs the owner something. But suppose the food was given to him, but then the food could have been given to someone else. So the idea in economics when we say that nothing's free is that everything has the fancy ugly jargon is an opportunity cost, that something else could have been done with those resources, even when there's no out-of-pocket. So
but
I don't think
you will grant me, though, that from my perspective, if I'm sort of saying, I'm not talking about, where all the value and money changes hands elsewhere. I'm just talking about as a consumer, as your guest at lunch. Mm-hmm. I can say that it is entirely and fully free to me.
Yeah, and I'll give you except for one little other thing, which I'll get to in a sec. One example would be you're walking down the street, and as you're walking, it doesn't even slow you down. Someone presses into your hand a piece of paper that you immediately, instantaneously recognize as a coupon for a meal at this great restaurant. So you have no out-of-pocket costs. You don't even have to deal with my conversation, which is another non-zero cost of this quote free meal, right? You're going to have to talk to me. Of course, you could daydream and gaze off into the distance and pretend to listen, but that wouldn't be as good a set of daydreaming and gazing off into the distance if you were by yourself. So even there,
what were you saying?
Yeah, exactly. You're going to have trouble paying attention and pretending to pay attention. It's going to affect the quality of your daydreaming. So, but in this case, it's just a free meal in the sense that there's no out-of-pocket. You don't have to listen to me. There's no fear that you have to reciprocate. I'm not going to ask you a favor. You're not going to invite me back on your dollar. But even in that case, of course, there's the time it takes to eat the meal. So that's a sense in which that meal isn't free in the literal sense. It's free in the out-of-pocket sense. It's free in the way people use the word in everyday language. But economists love to talk about these kind of examples where if you think about it long enough, there is a cost. It may not.
Right.
It may
so
not
that's
be
what I would call an externality. That's the attention cost.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an externality, but yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, you could say Wikipedia's. No one's monetizing your eyeballs, but Wikipedia takes your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the price you pay.
When you say my time as a contributor or my time as a reader?
I meant as a reader, but
yeah,
we could argue the other way as well.
Yeah, but that's again that cost we'd all understand is tiny, and it's zero compared to the alternative that I'd have to look at the information somewhere else. If I want to know, right? If I want to know the capital of France, and I go to Wikipedia versus some other site that has a charge, well, Wikipedia, they both have the eyeball cost, and then Wikipedia has the zero out of pocket. So it's about as close to free as you can get. It's a pretty good deal. Again, the economists would say the cost there isn't to the reader. It's to the contributor and to the Wikipedia itself that's put up the server space and the time to make it fairly quick, right?
And is that what Milton Friedman meant?
I think it is.
Did he mean what you said?
I hope so, because I like to think of him as an intellectual mentor, and I hope I'm getting it right. If anyone out there thinks I'm wrong, they're welcome to. But I think that's what Friedman meant by there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, which actually was first stated by Heinlein, the science fiction writer. I think is where that story.
It derives from 19th century San Francisco bars.
Oh, really?
Where you would get, if you drank more than one beer, you could get a free lunch.
But the idea that there wasn't one comes from Heinlein, and then Friedman popularized it in this.
That sounds right.
In this Tannstaffel formulation, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. By the way, my favorite sign in a saloon or a bar is the permanent sign that says "Free beer tomorrow."
Yeah, no, that shows up in all my textbooks actually.
That's one of my favorites. I've always loved that. I don't think I've ever actually seen it, but it's been told to me. It is a classic. Let's go back to a topic we touched on earlier. And again, I invite our listeners, both professional economists and otherwise, to critique our conversation of free lunch. But we talked earlier about media as newspapers as really a non-virtual example long before the internet, that basically either charged way below marginal cost for the product and made it up on revenue by expanding the base of readers. Or in the case of many publications in cities, the Chicago Reader being, or the Boston Phoenix being examples, where they give it away, literally. There's no out-of-pocket cost, and they count on the fact that it's a high-quality product, that people want to read it even though it's, quote, free, and they make up their revenue to cover the cost of paying their writers with the revenue that they can generate from ads, knowing that thousands and thousands of people are reading it. So I want to hear your thoughts as a new and old media person. Wired magazine is in print and it is online, as to the viability of that model down the road for the media.
Yeah. Well, there's a great irony in this, which is that free is, as you just said, is sort of the foundation of modern media. The three-body problem, where the third party, the advertiser, pays for access to the second party, the consumer, who gets the product for free or close to it. The basis of our industry. What's interesting is that the good news of the media model, the advertiser-driven model, is that it's expanding to all sorts of new domains beyond media. So Google, search engines, email, and all that sort of stuff is also driven by the media model, even though it's not a media company. And software services and all sorts of content online end up being advertising-driven, even though they're not. No one would consider them media companies. Meanwhile, the media companies themselves, the newspapers in particular, is the best example, are losing ground as the model becomes as they have to compete with measurable, more effective forms of advertising, such as Google's AdWords and AdSense, etc. So the media model is sort of failing the media, but succeeding everywhere else. I hasten to add at this point that we at Condé Nast are a huge exception to this rule.
Of course, you're making money hand over fist.
Because we make money hand over fist, but we do something the internet doesn't easily compete with, which is the glossy packaging of high-end magazines and long form and photography and design, all that. But that said, there is it is the problem with the media model as it applies to media is that it is the kind of thing we were talking about earlier, the non-measurability of the whole thing, the sort of assumption that there is this level of engagement with the media that is transferred and conferred to the advertisements that run alongside it.
Yeah.
Other things that the sort of whole Google generation is starting to challenge. The shift from pay-per-view, pay-per impression versus pay-per-click. From non-measurable to measurable, etc. So it's
And how do you
the
think
problem
that's
with
going?
the traditional media model is that they don't have a good way to prove that it works.
Well, I'm not sure it does work. I'm always skeptical of claims like that, but let's pretend that we know that it doesn't. Let's pretend, for example, that, let's take TV as a good example. Regular non-cable, non-satellite TV in the old days was zero out of pocket other than for the receiver. But the marginal cost was zero. Watching one more hour of TV wore out your television maybe a little bit, kind of. But basically there was no per-view charge. And they obviously covered the incredible costs of production of these TV shows through advertising. Now, I'm sure the early advertisers worried that, reasonably so, that people would just leave the room during that time or, veg out or turn the sound down or change the channel. All those things happened and do happen. And yet TV seems to be a viable way, at least for a long time, was a viable way to bring entertainment into people's houses. It's not clear to me that the internet is going to be able to do that. Most of us hate pop-up ads. We don't enjoy them the way we enjoy a little bit of TV.
So I think just in the same way that I'm not comfortable with the word media anymore, because media sort of implies professional institutions, a business, trained writers and editors. Whereas the reality is that we're competing largely with blogs and and Facebook and MySpace and individuals. So I don't really know what media means anymore. By the same token, I don't really know what advertisement means anymore. So you've described 30-second spots, radio spots, banner ads, glossy pages in the magazine. We're now switching online to a world where advertisement is just lines of text, just a couple words that are algorithmically selected as being relevant to the content they're running up against. Now let's go a little bit further. Now let's but at least they're separated. At least, if you look closely enough, you'll see that this is an ad and this is edit. But what about, the blogs that, some of my favorite blogs are written by Microsoft engineers about their particular projects. Is that an ad? I don't think so, and yet they're clearly promoting a commercial product. It completely blurs the line. Everything online is driven by the most powerful force in the universe, which is ego. We all contribute in a way to kind of promote ourselves, and in a sense, we're all advertising. Every post I make on every one of my 4 blogs, some of which you know about, some of which you don't,
You'll send them
if
to
I'm
me,
completely honest about myself, is a little form of self promotion. I'm a one-man advertising bureau for the brand called me.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think, by the way, the challenge, one of the reasons the media is having so much trouble, is they can't figure out the old style media. They can't figure out where that line starts and ends, right? And having said that, I know that doesn't mean anything, so I'll try to make it clear in a second. But having said that, the new media needs the old media, most of us. Most of us who blog are relying on the existence of online newspapers to critique and make fun of and analyze. And we would have a much harder time generating...
Ooh, I'm gonna stop you at the word most.
Most of the best ones? Most of the interesting ones?
You have no factual basis for that word most.
True.
You just don't know, and neither do I.
Well, I'm thinking of my blogs. That's a sample of one.
Okay.
A lot of what I do and what I think others do is write about what others do and others say. It's true we could write about each other's blogs, and some people do that. But I think without the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wired magazine to put in the URL and link to it and critique it and talk about it, it would be the blogosphere would be a very different place. So I won't quantify it and say most, but I think it would be a very different place. But I like your point about advertising it and that line being unclear. But what I was saying when I was going off into gibberish, what I meant to say was this. There's a weird competition going on. There's a bunch of people out there like you and me and hundreds of others and maybe a few thousand others who are giving stuff away that we used to charge for, right? We're basically running our own magazine. That's what that blog is, where we're the editor. And strangely enough, we like most of what we write, and it gets through the filter. And so we post a lot when we find the time. And that's in competition with the Boston Globe and the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune and Wired.
There's more of us than there are of them.
There are.
Even though none of us are necessarily as good as any of them, in aggregate, we do a better job because we can focus with infinite granularity on subjects of narrow relevance in the world, and the world lives in the narrow, not the broad.
And that's part of it. But the intriguing part to me is that the attempts to charge for the so-called higher quality product, the New York Times Premium, the Wall Street Journal, it's been incredibly hard, and it seems to be breaking down. And why does it break down? It breaks down because, quote, everyone else has decided to give it away. Why do they give it away? Because they're all...
That's not. Well, I mean, that's part of it. That's part of it. I mean, you said higher quality. What do you mean by quality? There is nothing in the Boston Globe that is of higher quality to me than the report of my son's soccer team match this weekend.
There's one thing that is, though, and that's the Red Sox box score.
Okay.
See, that's
right,
that's a serious remark.
And yet I don't need the Boston Globe for that, do I?
Well, that's the problem. Is I can get it from ESPN, I can get it from Yahoo Sports, I can get it from 50 places who've decided, for interesting competitive reasons, to give it away rather than charge for it, which makes it impossible for the Globe to charge for it. It's really
there's 2 dimensions. There is commodity versus non-commodity and relevance. If it's a commodity, i.e. I can get it other places, then in a competitive market, price falls to the marginal cost. Bingo, 0. And then there's relevance, which is to say the stuff that's most relevant to me is the stuff that's of narrowest appeal. It's really just of interest to me. And I will pay, I'm price insensitive. I will pay anything for that information. But the problem is that professional media organizations cannot scale down to the economic level.
That's the problem. And as a result, things that right now look like they've been driven down to marginal cost aren't quite at marginal cost. They're at marginal cost, but if they're not covering those fixed costs of that building with all the nice ceilings you've got in that loft in San Francisco, you either got to break that apart and send people home and have them telecommute, or you close the doors if you can't figure out ways to generate enough revenue.
Indeed.
So that's what's interesting. It's not. My claim is the story's not over. We just don't know how it's going to turn out.
I'm going. Maybe your listeners can help on this. I've actually saw a brilliant quote the other day, which I'm looking for the source for, which is some technology entrepreneur, software entrepreneur, web entrepreneur said, "What I love is finding $4 billion industries that I can turn into a $4 million industry." The idea being that there is no law that says that any particular industry needs to remain the size it's at. When Craigslist demonetized half the newspaper industry by making classifieds free, that's the marketplace in action.
Yeah.
The beneficiaries are the millions of us who saved a little bit of money on classifieds and have a better experience. The losers are a couple institutions who didn't move with the times. They demonetized an industry, and we're beating our breasts about what a tragedy it is. But I mean, I think that's brilliant.
No,
and if the media industry becomes one half the size of the media industry, sort of narrowly defined as commercial institutions who make media, is half the size that it once was, 50 years from now. But media as a service and an information flow to consumers is 100 times better. I think that's a win.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But what will we talk about around the water fountain when we don't have the same shared experiences?
There's always the weather.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And what you're really saying against my my pessimism is use your imagination, and you're right. Who knows what the so-called media, the right way to think about it is the information business. Who knows how we'll get our information in 20 or 10 or 5 years? The fact that we won't get it the same way will probably be a very good thing.
Right, right. And I'm sure
if it weren't,
sorry, go ahead.
No, if it weren't, we'd go back to something else. There'd be an opportunity for somebody to do something else.
I mean, 50 years ago, the typesetters unions were telling us that they were the last defenders of the Fourth Estate. That they were all that stood between us and tyranny.
Yeah, that's true.
And now the bosses of the major newspaper companies are telling us the same thing, and they're just as wrong.
Yeah, I agree. Well, anything else you want to say about free down the road, where it could stop, where it might go?
My book's going to be free.
How are you going to do that? I don't mean, that's not a rhetorical question. That's
yeah. No,
what are you gonna do?
Well, the digital forms, audiobook, ebook, webbook, marginal cost is zero, so they're free. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not in the book business. My publisher's in the book business, but I'm not in the book business. I'm in the sort of me business, which is to say, propagate my ideas far and wide and let me figure out how to monetize them. Partly we monetize them because as my ideas and my name, get out there, so Wired's name goes with it. So my bosses are happy. Partly I give speeches. I'll save the advertisement for later on this one,
right?
Etc. So I want to get the book out there and to be read as many people as possible.
How's your public? Do you have a contract?
I do. My publisher is Disney.
And what is Disney is going to?
And so Disney basically, I just have retained the digital rights to myself.
And with no restriction on pricing, et cetera.
No, give them away. Then there's the physical forms, and that what we're going to try to do, and we haven't signed any deals yet, so let's call this an ambition. We're going to try to make two physical forms of the book. One that is advertising supported and free, so there'll be a sponsor on the inside, front cover, inside, back cover, and maybe in the middle. And the question is that's easy to do. The question, the cost of a book is about $2.
Right.
So an advertiser just has to pay that, and the cost is how do you distribute that? Obviously, Barnes & Noble doesn't want to do it.
So
do you just distribute it at conferences, etc.? Maybe free to anyone who asks for it?
Metros. Just hand them out. That Washington Post does that. They hand them out as you get on the Washington Metro. They have a little miniature version. You don't give them the whole book. Leave out the last chapter.
But there's this whole problem in which we didn't talk about it. There's a zillion cliches about free that I have to sort of consider. But one of them is you get what you pay for. Do people value something less because it's free? And typically the answer is if it used to be costly and now it's free, they tend to value it less. This is the sort of the Village Voice jumped the shark when it went free. argument. And then there's things that were were never paid for, and people don't devalue them because they're free. This is Google search, for example.
They get mad when they're not free.
Exactly. So how do I sort of reset expectations about what a book is, and so that people value it as if they paid for it, without them having to actually pay for it? So we have to think. So the challenge there is not how to pay for the book. The challenge is how to distribute it in a way that invokes a kind of a positive psychological association.
Here's what I think you want. You want to have three versions. You got your ad-supported one. You got your, quote, normal one that has no ads. Then you have like a super ad one. And in that one, you pay $5 to people just to take the book out of the file. And what they find out when they open the book, they don't just get a sponsor and an ad. There's a chip in the book, so when they're on page 17 and you're mentioning something like that airline, it'll be, fly Ryanair. We're wonderful. That way, really don't just have an ad at the front and the back. Let's make it work.
I'll go even further. I'm going to now call my book a form of carbon sequestration, and we will pay people to take the book and to throw it away in their local landfills, because that's taking a couple pounds of wood and carbon and sticking it underground.
And just subtly say, along the way, you might want to look through it. And
that's right. If 1% of them read it on the way to the landfill, then hey.
Hey, and wait till you take it to China.
Just if it weren't clear, we're joking.
Yeah, kidding. But I do think it's interesting to go back to your Disney publisher. Did they give you roughly the same royalty rate that they did that you got on your earlier books, where there wasn't
royalty rate or advance?
Royalty rate, not advance.
Same royalty, yeah. Because
normally,
by the way, if I were a braver man, I would have put my money where my mouth is and declined the advance entirely in favor of a higher royalty rate.
No, I think you go the other way, actually. I think I'm serious. I think the secret is to decline the royalty rate and ask for a lower cover price. That's what I think is the way to go. And ask for a big advance, because that commits them to trying to market the book.
Right. Well, then that's the dynamics of the book industry. But basically, if I believe that free books sell more books, that spreading an idea to more people,
then
I would believe that I would benefit in straight royalties.
Yeah.
But I'll leave that for my third book.
Okay. Well, my guest today has been Chris Anderson, editor-in-chief of Wired, author of the forthcoming Free, which will be free. His article from Wired Magazine, Free, I think is free, and we'll put a link up to it, as well as to his 4 blogs, which you'll send to me, Chris, when you have a chance. Thanks for being part of EconTalk.
Thank you.
This is EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more EconTalk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for EconTalk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.